So Drake has released 3 new albums, which you know, but peppered throughout those tracks is repeated references to his relationship with Universal Music Group, his current or maybe former label. On Bees on the Table, he talks about taking on the man rather than the rapper, and then on Make Them Remember, he says he's shaking things up at Lucian's house. That's a reference to Lucian Grange, who is the CEO of UMG. Now, Drake's been actively suing UMG since January 2025 for their promotion of the Not Like Us Kendrick Lamar diss track. Now, a lot of people saw headlines that case had been dismissed by a judge, when actually there is an appeal that's still fighting its way through the Second Circuit Appeals Court. It's just now there are way more people involved. This is Fame Under Fire from BBC Sounds with me, Anoushka Mutanda-Dougherty. This is a legal battle about rap in the courtroom, art on trial, and of course the First Amendment. So it's only right that we have our resident constitution nerd, Dr. Sean Kent, joining us right now. Hi, Sean.
Hey, Anoushka, how are you doing?
I'm good. How was Aiken?
I need you to never do that Southern accent again.
Because if anyone's seen the film Beautiful Creatures, it's set in Aiken. That's why I know it.
Yes, but that might be as bad as my British accent.
I'm in Aiken, mama. Nobody gets out of Aiken, mama.
I got nothing. I got nothing.
Yeah. And when I apply for citizenship, this is what they'll play. So for those of you who aren't aware, don't know, somehow missed the Drake legal battle with UMG, we're going to speed through that. If you're with us on YouTube, you can actually jump to the section on Amicus Briefs for the latest update. But we're going to get into some things. Sean, can you just remind us why Aubrey Drake Graham, is suing Universal Music Group?
Aubrey, of course, everybody remembers the famous song Not Like Us that came out that Kendrick released. Drake was very offended, if you will, that the song depicted him as a pedophile. And so he was so upset with this, but really behind the scenes, what he was actually saying, according to the lawsuit, is that his record label was artificially inflating the numbers of Kendrick. And by artificially inflating the numbers of Kendrick, he artificially made this song a bigger hit than it was, taking it to a wider audience than it should have been. And then what it was doing is some of the lyrics in there were so offensive, according to him, it caused him a level of unspecified damages, 1 with his label, 2 with Worldwide. And so he had such a problem with this that he said, I'm going to file a suit. Now, he did not file the suit against the person who actually said the lines. He did not file it against Kendrick. He filed it against his record label, almost as a tacit co-conspirator, that they were down with the obscene and awful things that were said about him. So he went after his record label that said that you guys had a systematic way of trying to ruin my career.
It was interesting because, like you say, a lot of people assumed he'd sued Kendrick Lamar, but Universal Music Group was actually his label as well. But he spoke about some of those practices like whitelisting, so removing the restrictions on a particular track so streamers can play it in full. And he claimed that this was some of what UMG were doing to bolster the streams on Not Like Us. I mean, Not Like Us, it was everywhere. It really was everywhere. I mean, he was performing it at shows like 6, 7 times back to back. Now, in response to claims that Universal had deliberately harmed Drake's career, the label noted it had invested massively in his music, helping him achieve historic commercial and personal and financial success, which he has. And I just want to get into one thing here. It was defamation per se, not just your regular old defamation. Sean, can you just flesh out what the difference is?
In defamation, of course, as everybody understands, defamation is basically you can't talk trash about somebody else. But in the world, there is a healthy level of trash talking. Now, when you go to trial and you accuse somebody of defamation, usually you have to prove that the comment that they made was defamatory. Some of the stuff that Anoushka says about me in her elder abuse towards me could be seen as defamatory. However, I would have to go to a court and prove that the things that she has said against me are defamatory. And somebody was like, no, she's just joking. It's not defamatory. We'll throw your case out. Now, there's certain actions under the law that if you say them, just by saying them, just by uttering them, the court says that is what's called defamation per se. It is defamatory on its face. If you do something that directly affects somebody's job and career, like, you know, some of these Google review people who talk about somebody's business, if you directly affect their business. And in this situation, if you accuse somebody of committing a crime, in that situation, Drake is saying Kendrick accused him of being a pedophile. And for anybody uninitiated out there, that's a crime. And so the court says if you accuse somebody of this by itself, in and of itself, it is defamation per se, which means you don't have to prove it, and damages are presumed, and you just have to prove how damaged you were.
And he goes into some other things in his original complaint. He includes screenshots of people online showing that the general public believed that he was a pedophile, believed that he had committed abuse against minors. So there's comments like, quote, "I love this song. We would never have known that Drake is a whole pedophile if this information wasn't exposed," which obviously Drake denies, but he's therefore showing like actual damages. People genuinely believe this. And he also goes into something else, which is motive. And I don't think you actually need motive in a defamation case, do you?
You don't. You don't need motive in any case, realistically, in the United States. But if you're on a jury, everybody wants to know the why. So all lawyers
Mm.
realize you try to prove the why, you just don't need it.
So he basically says, quote, "The leadership of Interscope," that's the record label owned by UMG, "had every incentive to prove it could maximize Kendrick Lamar's sales after only recently persuading him to enter into his own direct license for a limited recording commitment of new music. They'd gone into new business with Kendrick, whereas," it continues, quote, "UMG's contract with Drake was nearing fulfillment. And on information and belief, UMG anticipated that extending Drake's contract would be costly. By devaluing Drake's music and brand, UMG would gain leverage to force Drake to sign a new deal on terms more favorable to UMG." So this was the basis of his complaint. He's got his cognizable damages. He's got his people genuinely believe this. He's included motive there if this went to a jury trial. But this was actually dismissed in October 2025 by a judge, but not dismissed with prejudice, meaning it can be raised again. If it's dismissed with prejudice, it's gone for good.
You
Why
got
did
it.
the judge dismiss this?
There's a federal rule 12b6, which allows the judge to dismiss a complaint, the lawsuit, on its face and say, there's nothing there. There's no issues that we have to discuss. And so when the judge read the complaint and listened back to both parties, made the decision to dismiss. One of the things that sometimes, this is a 38-page opinion, and we always talk about the fact, how do you get to the opinion to determine what the judge is going to do? But when you read like the first paragraph, "The penultimate song of this feud, Not Like Us by Kendrick Lamar, dealt the metaphorical killing blow." When you read a judge say that, you kind of know where this opinion is going to come on. And then the next line, "The song contains a lyric explicitly accusing Drake of being a pedophile, set to a catchy beat and a propulsive bass line."
What?
That is
The
literally from
judge.
the judge's opinion. And
The
so,
judge is like, "You're going to get all of my opinions."
yeah, and I feel like, and then the next line on this one paragraph, "Not Like Us went on to be a cultural sensation, achieving immense commercial success and critical acclaim." If I'm Drake and this opinion got released and I read the first paragraph, I just slide it over. I'm like, I think I know how this movie ends. But long and short, what the court ended up saying is they went to the first name. They started talking about defamation. And they said, nah, brah, this is not
Mm.
defamation. You have invited this, if you will. This is satirical at best. And 38 pages of, sorry, 38 pages of literally what they talking about. They talking about nothing. What they talking about. They talking about nothing. What they talking about. They talking about nothing. 38 pages of that is the opinion of what we just read of the court saying there's just nothing here. And we don't need to get to the discovery statute. We don't need to get to any of this part. We're done.
So Drake's original civil complaint has been dismissed, but he has taken the decision to appeal that. The judge says it's non-actionable opinion. What does that mean?
I mean, literally, the answer is in your definition. It's non-actual opinion. It is literally like you and I talking right now. It is not defamation. It is rap lyrics. It's him just offering his opinion. It's him just talking trash. And it does not get to the level that this should be quantified and talked about as if it's defamation. These are literally a genre that allows people to exhibit free speech. And because you have known it, because you have invited it, and one of the arguments in the appeal that Drake's team is making, and I'm glad you brought this up, is Drake's team is saying throughout the opinion, if you read it, the judge hearkens to and talks about other songs and other rap songs and how they have created this beef and how there's other references and things of pedophilia in some type of other songs. Drake's team is saying, look, you ruled on this via 12b6 on the complaint, which is the four corners of the document. It is not fair that you have made this ruling taking other things out that we didn't get to argue. Because remember, Anoushka, at a summary judgment station, they both get to argue and talk about the fact they did all the discovery. At a 12b6, the judge said, I've ruled on the complaint. Their problem is the judge ruled on the complaint, but talked about stuff outside of the complaint that Drake's team did not get to argue that they thought was patently unfair. But the court said, look, this is a rap beef. This is Drake, you invited it, if you will, in some points of this. So they said it is literally non-actionable opinion because it's going back and forth, and you should not be able to benefit from that with which you cause.
That was the slight addition to the previous episode we done on that, and all the parties were present. UMG being the defendant, Drake being the claimant, Kendrick's in the ether somewhere, watching, probably laughing. We've got the judge. But then came a bunch of other people, and I'd never seen this happen before because I remember I called you and I was like, who the heck is filing? Sean, explain to me Amicus briefs.
Yeah. It is a Latin phrase, amicus curiae, which literally translates to friends of the court, is what that means. An amicus brief is basically the nosy neighbor who has nothing to do with anything, who's just like, I want to be a part of this, and just like peeking is like, what are y'all talking about? But what ends up happening is somebody is watching this case. And I'm not saying this is what happened in this situation, but somebody is watching this case and said, the decision that is going to come out of this case is going to have such far-reaching effects on other people. We want to petition the court so we can be heard. Because remember, we talk about precedent. And once a court sets out a precedent or a law, it is a controlling law for everybody potentially in a situation. And so some other folks are out there saying, we think this is bad. So there was 2 amicus briefs filed, one out in California, a group of lawyers, a group of experts, a group of rap folks. And when you read the opinion, they're amicus. I always picture that they're doing it in some type of accent like this and saying, you know, rap music affects everybody. And according to us, we feel that this is completely unfair. When it's a bunch of legal rap scholars, and that's what they said. Amici are a nationally recognized experts on the use of rap lyrics in court.
Okay, if you ever hear Sean go silent or he goes off mic, it's because he's giving a full performance here. And you don't even know that if you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Sean, tell him to subscribe.
The facial expressions are everything.
But Sean, tell him to subscribe to the channel.
Subscribe.
Period.
But so what these amicus folks are literally, they come in and they have to get permission, okay? They can't just, like you talked about the fact, Anoushka, you're just going to write an amicus brief? No, you can't. Anoushka has a problem with this. No, they go to the court.
Damn straight.
They go to the court and they say, we have a vested interest in this. And so let me give an example of why this is important, and it does make sense, and something no one is talking about. The amicus brief are experts. They are individuals who are trying to protect the Constitution. So let's say, for argument's sake, the judge ruled that, you know what, Drake? Those lyrics are awful. He should not be able to use those against you. Those are true. These are bad. Well, let's talk about some of the far-reaching effects. Let's say the prosecutor then, and they back up, let's say that the judge says, we believe the things that he said are true and the world thinks they are true, and this is awful. Well, what are the far-reaching effects? Let's go to a case we've talked about before, David. So the prosecutors in David will say, well, that judge in New York, the federal district, has ruled that when you rap stuff, it is true. It should be allowed to be utilized. Romantic homicide, the case by the song by David, you know what? We're allowed to use rap lyrics against everybody. That is true. It's allowed to be utilized against him. And so that's why this group has gotten involved, because they're like, look, your decision is going to have bigger effects just than on Aubrey. They're going to have effects on anybody out there. It's going to have a chilling effect on anybody who is engaged in the rap music genre. Then when you couple that with the amicus failed by the Yale case, one of the more interesting lines from that case, Anoushka, that I thought was fascinating, they compare the battle between Drake and Kendrick to a literal fight. And they say the two individuals, and they talk about the word consent. And they said the two individuals got into a consensual fight, a mutual combat, if you will, and one got beat up, and now he's complaining about it. And it's so simple, but that's what they're saying is like, you can't do this. Consent should have been argued by UMG, and they did not argue that. And we want the court to consider that this is a consensual, stupid relationship.
It's like challenging someone for, I'm going to say fisticuffs, but I feel like
You're exactly right.
fisticuffs,
That's the language.
and then suing them for battery. Okay, so we've got these amicus briefs. You've just outlined the argument of consent, which is in one. There's another one that was penned by Jack Lerner. He's a professor at the University of California with the assistance of multiple scholars. And there's some interesting points. It says when courts ignore rap music's history and artistic conventions, the effect is to deny rap the status of art and instead to flatten the lyrics into literal confessions or statements of specific intent. Rap is an extension of the Black American tradition of oral storytelling and signifying, a technique that incorporates exaggeration, metaphor, and wordplay. And there's a whole argument that they make off the back of this about racial bias and what happens if you allow particularly rap lyrics into the courtroom. And then they also say, which is very interesting, stage names and public personas are big in the rap industry.
Yeah.
They're a defining feature of the genre. Rap artists routinely create fictional characters under which they perform. Marshall Mathers performs as Eminem. Jeffrey Williams performs as Young Thug. And I want to talk to you about Young Thug because your friend, Brian Steele, represented him. You guys
Absolutely.
might remember Brian Steele from the Diddy trial. He came in late, but he was on Diddy's defense team. And he is, in a weird full circle moment, also Drake wrote a song about him. Where's your song?
Right?
Right?
Oh,
Right?
I want a song.
Right? Yeah, yeah. Get on
I think
that.
I want like Barry Manilow singing the hook. Is that weird?
Luther Vandross, that Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Well played.
But you say, okay, we've spoken about this before, the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects certain rights, and part of that is artistic expression that is protected by the First Amendment. You're looking at me like I'm getting this wrong.
No,
okay, right.
I'm very excited where this is going. You see, I've got a little grinch
Okay,
smile on
so
my face. I like
the
where this
judge is
going.
basically saying, or in this amicus brief, they're saying if you flatten rap and you remove its status as art, you take the lyrics as factual allegations, you deny its place in the history of its musical conventions, right? But your friend Brian very famously said in his opening statement for Young Thug, in the Young Thug trial, Young Thug was spent more than 900 days in custody after being arrested in 2022 on racketeering and gang-related charges, but he was later released after pleading guilty to gang, drug, and gun charges. But Brian Steele says during the opening statements that Thug means truly humbled under God, and that's what the name meant to Young Thug. That was the argument that was made.
Creative lawyering goes a long way in courtrooms sometimes.
But what about, so if he's opened that door to say that, well, actually, Young Thug's not a thug because thug means
that
truly
I would have
humbled
been
under
very
God.
careful about that because that would have opened you. God, I love your legal analysis. You're exactly right. Something of that, if you're not careful, could completely open the door to put but you could have put anybody else on the stand at that point in time to say what Young Thug actually means. That is gold star for Marcus. That is
Gold star for Marcus.
That is a absolutely wonderful bit of legal analysis. And what you have to be careful with this, Anoushka, and I mean, I love what the amicus briefs were saying. We tend to forget that a lot of these guys in the rap game are pure, unadulterated exaggerators. And so if we're not careful in saying that everything that they say is truth, then you're going to start requiring them to put everything in there in truth. A notoriously perfect example is 50 Cent. You know, when he sings a lot of his songs, 50 don't drink, 50 don't do drugs. But if you look at most of his songs early in his career, he said, yeah, I just put that in there because I thought that what people want to hear because I just want to make money. And that's what a lot of them are doing. And a lot of them are talking about fighting and killing and so forth. It's an exaggerated form of expression. And if we start creating, and that's what these amicus briefs are saying, this is a form of expression. This is a form of exaggeration at some point in time. It should never be forced to be a form of everything you say is the truth. And it should never be, dear diary, this is how I readily expressly feel.
And I understand all of that, and it needs to be protected, and I get that. And surely if you open the door to rap lyrics, you can open the door to things like heavy metal. They say crazy stuff. I was going to try and do, ages ago when we did the hip-hop episode on Diddy, we were looking at some heavy metal lyrics as well. I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. Yes, well, me, oh my.
Oh my. That's when your Southern accent should come in. The phrase you need to learn is bless your heart. From now on, you just say bless your heart. That is our Southern phrase when you want to say nice or mean about something. You say bless your heart.
Bless your heart. I'm getting there. What actually is the First Amendment? No, I
The
sound
first
stupid.
the First Amendment to me, and you said it, it is sacrosanct. It is as important of amendment. It is an important rule in our country. It is, and it is currently under attack. Why is it currently under attack? Because the purpose of the First Amendment is to protect your freedoms of speech, to protect your right to redress against the government, to protect your right to be able to say what you want, how you want. Now, your speech level only goes that far. You cannot do things that are going to cause anyone else physical harm. The example that is often used in law school, Anoushka, is you cannot run into a crowded theater and yell fire. Yes, you have the
Mm.
freedom of speech, but that could cause immediately harm because everybody could run out of there and hurt themselves. That is not necessarily protected. But we have a right to express ourselves. We have a right to talk about our leaders. We have shows such as Saturday Night Live, things of these natures, comedians, rappers who have the right, even though you may not like it, they have a right to say some of the most onerous, awful expressions they want. Well, and that's one of the things, like this is freedom of expression, freedom of art, freedom of music. It all goes into our actual expression, Anoushka, when we talk about it. And so we have had battles throughout history, and it talks, I mean, this goes as far as what is art? Is pornography art? It all goes into the right that we as people have a right to express ourselves and our values and our beliefs that we feel are necessary. And so that's one of the reasons this amicus brief is so strong on both ends, because people understand that an artistic freedom, the right for people to be different, to express themselves different, is sacrosanct and important in being an American.
You speak about art being part of freedom of expression, and they talk about flattening rap lyrics, and I get all of that. But how far does that protection last? And like, walk with me here. If you commit a crime and then turn the crime into art, is it protected? Like if I killed you and turned you into a statue, is it? What if I killed you and painted a canvas with your, this is getting dark, with your blood? Shout out Vampire Diaries. Would that be could someone argue that that's protected because it's artistic expression?
If you cause somebody's death, you're not allowed to profit. We have statutes out there. We have slayer laws that prevent people from profiting over their criminal actions. The crime, you can still be convicted of the crime, but
Yeah, you can
then
still be convicted of it.
absolutely can be convicted of the crime. However, and do you have a right to talk about it, sing about it? If you use your common sense and just look at it, how many times have they interviewed individuals on jail, on death row and things of this nature, and they've done interviews and things of this nature. So you're still protected, but then they do a little caveats around there to make sure you cannot profit.
And I wanted to really focus in on the First Amendment protections because, yes, it's central to the amicus briefs that are being written in the Drake case, but it's also central to the David case, and it's central
Absolutely.
to multiple Kanye West cases. I want to zero in on Kanye West right now because Kanye is using the First Amendment as a defense against accusations of anti-Semitism. He took out his full page in the Wall Street Journal to apologize to the African American community and the Jewish community. This isn't the only place he's using it, but we're going to use this example. In one case where he's being sued by an employee who claims she heard him use anti-Semitic slurs, his lawyers wrote, quote, "Ye is not merely a creator, he is art. Ye's public and private personas form a continuous, provocative performance that challenges societal taboos surrounding race, religion, gender, power, politics, and censorship." So if you declare that you are art, you can get away with anything with a very literal reading of the First Amendment?
No. When we talk about protection, we mean from criminal liability. When we talk
Hmm.
about First Amendment protection, we talk about the fact that you're not going to go to jail for the stuff that you have said. You will not lose your freedom. So when we say freedom of expression, we need to channel that first word, freedom. You're not going to lose your freedom for saying stuff. Now, then we go to our civil context. Can you be sued? Absolutely. Because you do have a right to say it, but if you offend somebody and do these certain things, you do have the right to be sued. So the person who said, so Kanye saying, I'm allowed to say this offensive stuff, you absolutely are. And now I'm going to sue you for it. So you understand they're two totally different spectrums. So I do think Kanye has the right to say some of the stuff that he says, and I also have the right to be offended. And then the question is, does my offense rise to the level of actionable, cognizable damages?
And you mentioned earlier, the other case, of course, is David, where he's been accused of the murder, dismemberment, and continuous sexual abuse of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, who was 13 at the time of that sexual abuse and died at 14 years old. David has entered a not guilty plea on all charges, but a lot of his artwork, as pointed out by his, I guess, fans, internet users, focuses around tumultuous romantic relationships, and death. There is a music video where he is dragging a body across the floor. We do see later on that that body is also him, and he puts it inside of the trunk of a car. If the door is opened on the Drake case, does it open the door for a David case?
That's why the amicus brief is such a big deal. And I love that you've asked that question, because that's the whole point of why the amicus is getting involved. They're like, we want to be careful creating a precedent that if Drake is allowed to say that everything that rappers say is true, then there's going to be an argument all the way across the country. Because remember, one's filed in New York and one's happening in California. And some prosecutor in California is going to say, you see what the federal court has said, Your Honor? They have said that all rap is true. And then it's just like him dragging a body means he must have been killing people. And therefore, we should put this in front of the jury. And that's what, if you read the amicus, they're like, juries believe once they hear some of the stuff that these folks say in rap songs, they automatically believe it's true. And so we have to stop. It has a chilling effect on the First Amendment and freedom of expression. And what it will do, and I know some people will say, so get rid of it. We don't like that rap music anyway. Dilbert, I can't stand it. But what will end up happening is if you create a situation where rappers are saying, and artists, musicians are saying, if you put some of this stuff in the song and people take it as true, then you could be looking at criminal consequences and they could be used against you. It will stifle our freedom of expression. And we want people to be free to express themselves.
And with that David case that we're talking about there, we don't even know if that's going to go to trial. David has entered a not guilty plea on all charges. We've got that preliminary hearing right now scheduled for June 29th and that status conference on the 17th of June. And you know me and Sean will be covering that. We did ask both Universal Music Group and Drake for a comment. I'd wager Drake is a bit busy. We haven't immediately heard back from either of them. And Kendrick Lamar has yet to comment on the case. I'm sure if he does so, it will be in the form of sweet music. Sean, thank you so much. And Sean, what are we telling everybody to do?
YouTube. Subscribe.
Yes.
Subscribe. Watch this. Fame under fire. Period.
All right. Sean, thank you very much. You can go back to Aiken now.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. You guys have a great day and a great week.
Bye, Sean.
Bye, guys.
That was our resident trial attorney, Sean Kent from South Carolina. And that's it for this episode of Fame Under Fire from BBC Sounds with me, Anoushka Mutanda-Dougherty. If you want to support this channel, hit the like and hype button on the YouTube app to get us on the podcast leaderboard and add your questions in the comments below.